I'm still shaking as I write this, and it's been 3 weeks since it happened. I keep telling myself I'm being paranoid, but I can't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong with that night. I met this girl on a dating app. Let's call her Phoebe, since that's what she told me her name was. She seemed normal enough, pretty, had this sweet smile in all her photos. We went on 2 dates before this. Nothing fancy, just coffee, and then dinner at this Italian place downtown. She was charming, funny, asked all the right questions about my job at the marketing firm. I thought I'd finally found someone decent after months of disappointing matches. When she invited me to her high school reunion, I was honestly flattered. I mean, that's kind of a big deal, right? Meeting someone's old friends, seeing where they came from. She said it was her 10-year reunion at some private school upstate, about an hour drive from the city. I figured it would be fun, maybe a little awkward like these things usually are, but I was looking forward to learning more about her. She picked me up in this older Honda Civic that smelled faintly of vanilla air freshener, and we drove up on a Saturday evening in early October. The venue was this old country club that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. You know, the type, with that weird burgundy carpet and wood paneling everywhere. The parking lot was pretty full when we got there around 7, and I could hear music and voices coming from inside. Phoebe seemed nervous, which I thought was normal, since reunions can be weird for everyone. She kept checking her makeup in the car mirror and smoothing down her black dress. When we walked in, the first thing that hit me was how quiet it got for just a second, like everyone turned to look at us. Then the conversations picked back up, but I swear I felt eyes on me the whole time. The decorations were typical reunion stuff, balloons in what I assumed were school colors, some photo boards with old yearbook pictures, a banner that said, Class of 2014, 10-year reunion. Simple math told me everyone should be around 28, maybe 29 tops. But as I looked around the room, something felt off. These people looked way older than they should have. Not just tired or stressed older, but like genuinely aged beyond their years. Their skin had this weird texture to it, almost waxy, and their smiles seemed forced in a way that made my stomach turn. Phoebe immediately started mingling, dragging me around to meet people whose names I instantly forgot. Everyone was super friendly, but in that aggressive way that feels fake, like they were trying too hard to seem normal. This one guy, Brad or Brett or something, shook my hand, and his skin felt cold and clammy, like he'd been standing in a freezer. He kept asking me questions about myself, but weird specific ones like what street I grew up on and if I had any siblings. When I mentioned my younger sister Sarah, his eyes lit up in this unsettling way, and he wanted to know all about her, where she lived, what she did for work, if she was single. I started giving vague answers because something about his interest felt predatory. Meanwhile, Phoebe was talking to this group of women who all had the same strange, ageless quality. They looked like they could be anywhere from 25 to 45, but their mannerisms were off, like they were trying to remember how to act young. One of them kept staring at me over Phoebe's shoulder with these intense gray eyes that never seemed to blink. I tried to catch Phoebe's attention to suggest we grab some drinks, but she was completely absorbed in whatever they were talking about in hushed voices. The whole atmosphere in that room was suffocating. The music was this weird mix of songs that didn't quite match up with what should have been playing at a 2014 reunion. Some of it sounded way older, like from the 90s or even 80s. I noticed there weren't any of those typical reunion activities you'd expect. No slideshow of old photos, no remember when stories being shared loudly. Instead, people clustered in small groups having these intense, quiet conversations that stopped whenever I got too close. I went to the bar to get us some drinks, and the bartender, this older guy with yellowed teeth, leaned in close when he handed me 2 beers. His breath smelled like something had died in his mouth, and he whispered, "You seem like a nice young man. Lot of good years ahead of you." The way he said it made my skin crawl, like he was sizing me up for something. When I got back to Phoebe, she was standing alone by one of those photo boards, staring at the pictures with this expression I couldn't read. I looked over her shoulder to see what had caught her attention, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In several of the yearbook photos, there were faces that looked exactly like some of the people at the party, but the photos were clearly much older than 2014, way older. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were siblings, or maybe I was just seeing things because I was already feeling uneasy. But when I looked closer at one photo labeled Class of 1987, I saw that same woman with the grey eyes who'd been staring at me earlier. She looked identical, not like a relative or someone who resembled her, but exactly the same person. Same hair, same face, same cold expression. My hand started shaking as I held my beer, and I had to force myself to breathe normally. I nudged Phoebe and pointed at the photo, asking if she knew who that was. She glanced at it quickly and said something about old photos getting mixed up, but her voice had this nervous edge to it that I'd never heard before. She grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the photo board, suggesting we go outside for some fresh air. As we walked toward the exit, I caught fragments of conversations that didn't make sense. People talking about the harvest and new additions, and someone mentioning how this one looks promising. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, but I didn't want to seem crazy or rude. Phoebe seemed different too, more tense, and she kept glancing around like she was looking for someone or something. The patio outside was dimly lit with these old-fashioned lanterns that cast weird shadows across the concrete. There were a few other couples out there, but they were all standing way too close together, whispering in each other's ears in a way that felt intimate but wrong. Phoebe lit a cigarette, which surprised me because she'd never smoked on our previous dates. Her hands were shaking as she brought it to her lips, and when I asked if she was okay, she just nodded and said reunions always made her nervous. I was about to suggest we head back inside when this guy approached us, someone I hadn't seen at the party before. He was probably in his 30s, wearing a worn denim jacket and jeans, and he looked completely normal compared to everyone else. He walked right up to me, ignoring Phoebe completely, and said in a low voice, "You need to leave, now." I thought he was drunk or crazy, but there was something urgent in his eyes that made me pay attention. Phoebe immediately stepped between us, her whole demeanor changing from nervous to defensive, almost aggressive. She told him to leave us alone, that he wasn't supposed to be there. The guy looked at me over her shoulder and said, "Her name isn't Phoebe. Check your wallet when you get home." Then he turned and walked away into the parking lot before I could ask what he meant. Phoebe was furious, muttering under her breath about how some people couldn't mind their own business. But I could see panic in her eyes, and she kept looking toward the parking lot where the guy had disappeared. I asked her what he was talking about, why he said her name wasn't Phoebe, but she brushed it off, saying he was probably some creep who crashed the party. Her explanation didn't sit right with me, especially after everything else I'd noticed that night. When we went back inside, the atmosphere had shifted even more. People were staring at us openly now, and I heard someone whisper, "He knows," as we passed. The woman with the grey eyes was standing by the entrance, and when she saw us, she smiled in a way that made my stomach drop. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile you'd see on someone who knew a secret you didn't want them to know. I suggested we leave, saying I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't entirely a lie. My head was pounding, and I felt nauseous from all the weird vibes in that place. Phoebe agreed, but she seemed reluctant, like she was disappointed we were cutting the night short. As we gathered our coats, I noticed several people following our movements with their eyes, tracking us like predators watching prey. The drive back to the city was the longest hour of my life. Phoebe barely spoke, just gripped the steering wheel tight and stared straight ahead, I tried making conversation about the party, asking about her classmates, but she gave short, evasive answers that didn't really tell me anything. The radio was playing static-filled oldies that seemed to match the weird timeline confusion from the reunion. Every few minutes, I'd catch her glancing at me in a way that made me uncomfortable, like she was studying me or trying to figure something out. When we stopped at a red light about halfway home, I noticed a car that had been behind us since we left the country club. It was an older sedan with tinted windows, and even though I couldn't see the driver, I had the distinct feeling we were being followed. I mentioned it to Phoebe, and she looked in the rearview mirror with what seemed like recognition, not surprise. She said it was probably just someone else heading back to the city, but she took a couple of unnecessary turns after that, and the car disappeared. By the time we reached my apartment building, I was exhausted and confused, but mostly I just wanted to get away from her and try to process everything that had happened. She didn't try to come up or suggest another date, which honestly relieved me. She just said she'd had a nice time and drove off quickly, leaving me standing on the sidewalk feeling like I'd just escaped something terrible. Once I got inside my apartment, I remembered what that stranger had said about checking my wallet. I pulled it out and went through everything. Credit cards, driver's license, some cash, receipts. At first, nothing seemed missing or different, but then I noticed something that made my heart stop. There was a small piece of paper tucked behind my insurance card that definitely hadn't been there before. It was folded tiny, and when I opened it, there was an address written in handwriting I didn't recognize, along with what looked like a phone number. The address was in a part of town I'd never been to, kind of a rundown industrial area. Below the address, someone had written 3 a.m. bring him in the same handwriting. My hands were literally trembling as I stared at this note. I had no idea when someone could have slipped it into my wallet, but it had to have been at the reunion. The only time I'd taken my wallet out was at the bar, and I remembered how close that creepy bartender had gotten when he handed me the drinks. I immediately thought about calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That my girlfriend's reunion was weird and someone put a note in my wallet. They'd think I was crazy or paranoid. I couldn't sleep that night. Every little sound in my building made me jump, and I kept checking the locks on my door and windows. I tried Googling the address from the note, but it just showed up as some kind of warehouse district with no specific business listed. Around 2 a.m., I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard a car idling outside my building. I looked out my bedroom window and saw that same dark sedan from earlier parked across the street with its engine running. I watched for about 10 minutes, but I couldn't see anyone inside because of the tinted windows. The car just sat there, like whoever was inside was waiting for something. I was about to call 911 when the car finally drove away, but slowly, like they weren't in any hurry. The next morning, I tried calling Phoebe to talk about what had happened and maybe get some answers about that weird reunion. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and when I tried the number again later, I got a message saying it was disconnected. That's when I really started to panic. I drove to the coffee shop where we'd had our first date, thinking maybe someone there would remember her, but when I described her to the barista, she just shrugged and said she saw so many people every day. I felt like I was losing my mind, like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I remembered I'd taken a few photos at the reunion with my phone, just random shots of us together and the decorations. When I scrolled through them, most looked normal enough, but there was one that made my blood freeze. It was a picture I'd taken of Phoebe standing by that photo board, and in the background, you could clearly see several of the reunion attendees. But here's the thing that really messed me up. In the photo, some of their faces looked blurred or distorted, like the camera couldn't focus on them properly. And that woman with the gray eyes wasn't in the picture at all. even though I clearly remembered her standing right there when I took it. I showed the photo to my roommate when he got home from work, and he said the blurring was probably just a camera malfunction, but even he admitted the whole situation sounded sketchy. I decided to do some digging online, searching for that private school Phoebe had mentioned. I spent hours going through websites and social media, but I couldn't find any record of a school by that name in the area where the reunion was held. No graduation announcements, no alumni pages, nothing. It was like the school didn't exist, or at least not where she said it was. The really disturbing part came when I decided to reverse search one of the photos I'd taken of Phoebe using one of those face recognition websites. I know it sounds stalkerish, but I needed answers about who she really was. The results that came back made me sick to my stomach. Her face appeared in several old newspaper articles dating back years, sometimes decades, but always with different names. In one article from 2003, she was listed as Maria Santos in a missing persons report. In another from 1998, she was Jennifer Walsh, who had apparently died in a car accident. But it was definitely the same face, the same person I'd been dating. The most recent article I found was from just 6 months ago, about a guy named David Chen who had disappeared after going on a few dates with a woman matching Phoebe's exact description. The police had questioned her, but she'd given them a fake name and address, and they'd never been able to track her down. Reading that article felt like ice water in my veins, because I realized I could have been next. I printed out all the articles and photos, making copies of everything in case something happened to me. I even wrote up a summary of everything that had occurred and emailed it to myself and my sister just in case. For the next 2 weeks, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, changing my routines, staying at friends' places instead of my own apartment. I kept expecting to see that dark sedan again, or run into Phoebe somewhere, but nothing happened. It was like she'd just vanished completely, along with whatever group of people she'd been working with. I never did figure out what that reunion really was, or what they were planning to do with me. Sometimes I think about that note in my wallet and wonder what would have happened if I'd actually gone to that address at 3 a.m. The thought makes me physically sick. I reported everything to the police eventually, giving them all the articles and photos I'd found, but they said, without more concrete evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. They did confirm that the phone number Phoebe had given me was registered to a burner phone that had been purchased with cash. The officer I spoke with mentioned they'd had similar reports over the years, people who'd gone on dates with someone who turned out to have fake identities. But the cases never led anywhere because the perpetrators were always ghosts. He advised me to stay vigilant and change all my passwords and personal information, which I did immediately. The strangest part is how abruptly everything just stopped. No more mysterious cars, no more weird phone calls or messages, no sign of Phoebe or anyone from that reunion. It's been 3 weeks now, and part of me wonders if I overreacted, if maybe it was all some elaborate prank or misunderstanding. But then I look at those newspaper articles again, and I remember the way those people stared at me, the way that bartender talked about my good years ahead, and I know something sinister was definitely going on. I've started dating again, but very carefully, always meeting in public places and doing reverse image searches on profile photos before I even swipe right. I probably seem paranoid to my friends, but they didn't see what I saw that night. They didn't feel the wrongness in that room, or realize they were being sized up like livestock. Sometimes I wonder about that guy who warned me, who he was, how he knew, whether he'd been in my situation before. I wish I could thank him, because I'm pretty sure he saved my life. Whatever Phoebe and her people were planning, whatever that reunion really was, I'm just grateful I got out when I did. But I still sleep with all my lights on, and I probably always will.